Our little southern French town here is going to more than double in size in this episode. And not just that, I do some really cool custom things, like some of the coolest things or most enjoyable things I think I've ever built in the game. And the first one of those custom builds I'm going to build is a little jewelry shop in an old ancient ruin. I really can't tell you why, I just sort of had a picture in my mind of this sort of happening and it looked right and I thought it would be cool to make. So with that said, I hope it is realistic. I think it is. It looks cool anyway and it was fun. But before I get to building that, I need to lay out this block here where I'm going to situate it correctly. I've got a pedestrian path running down the middle of this block, and that's what we're going to work around. I'm going to leave just a bit of a space in the middle for us to work with. I'm going to let you guys make your mind up on what you think these old ruins might be, but I just thought it'd be really cool if they were sort of retrofitted with a really nice classy little shop. And a jewelry shop I think is perfect. I haven't left any particular shape with these buildings here, and the gap that I've left, I've just sort of tried to run with what's left over from building the block. I'm using this old ancient right angle block wall from Quad Riders to make the main structure, and the predominant feature I want here is I want an archway that the path is running through, so it looks like we're actually walking right through the middle of this ancient structure. I'm not sure why, but I really love making the citizens walk through these custom walkways. I think it's really cool. Now, getting technical a little bit, you can see here that the archway is the same texture and brick that the rest of these walls are. It's very important that the structure looks like it's made out of exactly the same material. And being honest, these really aren't the best textures I've used in the town, but because they all match, it makes sense to use them here. So the next challenge is to try and retrofit new shops in, because obviously if they're being used for commercial, which I'm doing right now, they've been retrofitted somehow. There might be glass between some of the arches, there might be new floors, maybe they've made the walls level and square inside so they can hang things up. No one is going to go and spend thousands of dollars on jewellery in an old shitty dungeon. So we've really got to dress these up a little bit. But that is also exactly where things get a little bit complicated, because we also want to keep some of that nostalgia. So I don't want to completely clean up the inside here. Maybe some of these walls are still bare and showing the original building materials. Maybe it's some of these beautiful ancient weathered walls that really give the beauty to the jewels. Either way, it's quite the balancing act to try and show it being retrofitted up to current building standards, but showing some of that age. I wanted to get the interior of the buildings done, including all the lights, before I did any type of roof or finish the rest of the main structure. I'm going to extend the top up here to like a turret, sort of a lookout. I guess in my mind this is some sort of fortification to look after the town. Maybe it's been here for a few hundred years. I show a little bit of that age on the roof here. I'm using one of Sully's Greek decals, and I put a little bit of grass around. I also spend a little bit of time detailing around the paths in the nearby area, and I'm so stoked with how this comes out. So we have added another really cool custom little build here to our town. I've also filled out a big block here, and it's a really odd size, so I'm really happy to have nailed that. And as you guys can see here, the town is really starting to fill out. In real life, we've got a walkway running out of the town at approximately this location, going pretty much up the cliffside to an old chapel. This was always going to be pretty much impossible for me to copy like for like, so I've decided to do a really custom build here. Now there are so many things here I do along the way that are completely custom that I'm just going to stick with what you guys are seeing on screen. And the first part here is transitioning out of town, and this is going to be pretty much black and white. There's no paddocks or farmland that we go through, it's right up against the cliff, so it's going to be pretty much straight out and into nature. However, on the very edge of town, I do want it to be beautiful with old wooden fences and flowers. Remembering that this is all going to be functional, we're going to have real people coming up this path. The next thing I want to do is run that path right across the river, and then I'm going to do something really crazy. I want to make a really old swing bridge here. I don't know how realistic that is. I remember someone mentioning in the comments that wood structures aren't very common around these parts of France, but I was just desperate to make some sort of really custom bridge. I know that there's going to be a lot of people walking over this in game, and it was just something I'd never done before. So I've got a concrete pedestrian path with a slight dip in the middle, and I'm going to use a wood pile prop with procedural objects and make some runner boards that run with the pedestrian path. I also want to try and make this bridge make sense from an engineering point of view. I'm not sure how proud of me Acurus would be at this point, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So what that's going to include is some sort of stone footing at each end of the bridge. For those parts, I end up using a planter and blowing it up with procedural objects, positioning it in the right place. And then once I'd done that, I did a lot of work off camera here, shuffling things out of the way, but we put decals down, finished the area up before we move on, and it feels good to get things done as we move forward. So you can see here I've made the path invisible. Now we can carry on building this bridge, and I am going to continue to call it a swing bridge during the time that I make it, but that might not be what it's called. That's what we call them in New Zealand, but it's basically made up of two structures on either side of the river that are normally quite high, and they have wires and these wooden deck treads I've already put down that basically make up the actual bridge part. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, I don't know how realistic this is for France, and the reason I'm a little bit worried about that is because I've been so accurate with everything so far that if I'm a little bit off, maybe it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. But with that said, I had this kind of vision to make this bridge because I thought it would be cool, especially if we could get real citizens walking over it. And in the past, in this series, when I get those sort of visions or premonitions, I've got to go with them. They always work out really well. So I am prepared to forgo the realism for just this little bridge in place of coolness. It's also partly made out of a football goal. Now, this was the closest prop that I had to what I wanted to achieve here. I've had to turn it to procedural objects, but the netting here offers a sort of a chain link look, and I'm going to use this on each side of the bridge, connecting both structures on each side to the footing of the bridge, and this is basically going to take all the weight. Essentially, this is a suspension bridge. I'd love to hear what you guys think of that little bridge, but it is done and I'm really keen to see some people walking across it, so I want to get this path in place and up to where it needs to go pretty quickly. I had big plans on re-terraforming this area, but I'm going to run this path exactly with what I've got here. I don't want to touch it. I think it's going to help make it look a bit more organic. But in saying that, we are going to highly modify this path. So I'm going to get it to a certain point and then I'm going to come back and start detailing it. The first section here, I want to make it look like it's carved into the cliffside. So I'm using these rock props by Vecchio Cristo, turning them to procedural objects and matching them very closely to the edge of the path. Once I've done that, we move on to form and functionality with our detailing. The functionality is going to include a handrail. You see me put a network one in here to begin with, but we change this a little bit later on because it just looked too perfect, and this would be a pretty ancient walkway. Perfect is the enemy. And the form part of the detailing might include the stone that I've covered the path over with. I get lots of questions and comments in regards to why I don't use invisible pedestrian paths. I definitely do use them in some places, but in places like this, I've got far more control covering a concrete path without changing it to invisible, because I can fit these very neatly to the concrete path and cover it completely. There's no need to change it to invisible. And it also means I've got no chance of the path being manipulated at all without me seeing it being invisible, which, believe me, happens more often than you would think. So in real life, this path crosses a few awesome little old ancient stone bridges along its way up to the chapel. Even though our path isn't exactly like for like, I'm going to try and include at least a couple of those really cute stone bridges. And to make these bridges look realistic, I've sort of decided to make it look like there's a bit of a runoff from the cliffs here if they get a lot of rain or whatever. I'm creating these little wee grassy valleys that just sort of go with these bridges. One and then another one a little bit lower down. And the path's going to cross over both of them. The real life version of this is more than just the chapel at the end of the walkway. It includes a couple of little interesting spots along the way up. I've got room here on this little wee point to include one. You guys can again decide what you think this is. Maybe it's an old little wee church or place of prayer or something like that. But a lot of it's going to be made out of the same stone as the walkway. I figure it's probably made in the same era with the same materials. And we're also going to make the building look really aged. Lots of overgrowth, the roof is really mossy, there's cracks and broken fences everywhere. And yes, I even slip a little entertainment cube in here, of course. I mean, I want people coming up and going into this building as well as the chapel, which we are going to build next. Apart from the odd person being sucked into the ground, I really love this. He's fine, we sent him walk into the church, so don't worry. Now, let's move on to the crowning glory. I need to pick a building to double as our chapel. The criteria here is old, lime-washed or yellowish stone, and it needs to have some sort of terracotta roof, and I'd like it to have some sort of tower or lookout. That, of course, is following what we see in real life. My favourite 2 words from this episode. But if we want to make this genuine, that's got to be the main rule, right? So you can see I'm combining two buildings here with procedural objects to try and achieve that. I couldn't change the color, however, so I had to use the text customization function with the colored rectangle, set it to max and matched that color as closely as I could to the rest of the building, and it kind of worked. All I had to do was add a different terracotta roof in and it looked all good. So let's move up to where we're going to put in this chapel. I'm going to bring some prop cliffs in nice and tight here so it looks like it's really snug on this little flat section. I've found a really good spot where I want to put the chapel right on the edge of the cliff, so I copy and paste that and put that in place. I also want to make it look like it's very tight to the cliff on the outside as well, so we use some prop ones and bring that in close. Next is to cover this in foliage because this has to look really old. So that's pretty much the chapel done. It's very simple and I want to leave it as such because it speaks for itself really. But this area up here is far from done. I want to add a bit of a social courtyard in up here. I'm working off the level of the terrain that it's at, but I have to add some surfaces in places because it's not perfectly level. I'm going to have a real pedestrian path double round here in a little bit of a loop with some entertainment up here, and we're going to have real citizens walking through this little courtyard. Now this is also highly visible from the rest of the town, right up on the cliffside, so I'm so stoked to see what that looks like when it's all done. And it's also a big part of why I've decided to put this quite a big social area up here. There's heaps of photo opportunities, whether it's with the chapel or, you know, the town in the background lower down. There's a really nice view of the surrounding landscape, for instance. I really love the uniqueness of this area up here. So let's talk City Skylines props. I'm using a cobblestone for the decal on the ground, but it's been changed to a limestone color. I've used the same stone walls as a retaining wall on the cliff edge as I have on the path on the way up to show that it's being built by the same people or the same generation. And I'm also going to put some ancient ruins up here as well, and the path's going to go around and through these, which should be pretty cool. The area is going to be finished off with planters with some beautiful trees in them. We've got some benches and seats around, and of course some really nice flowers and overgrowth around the place as well. It's so cool to see the people finally walking across the bridge. I'd have to say that's probably one of the most custom builds I think I've ever built in City Skylines. I went really hardcore with the detailing on that. I'm very pleased to have knocked that out because it was always going to be one of the more difficult things to build while we're here in France as well. I'd like to thank you guys very much for tuning in and catching this episode. I've also got a few new subscribers. Thank you guys so much for coming over to my channel and choosing to support me and watch my content. I would like you and everybody else who watches my content to know you're very much appreciated. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's episode. Give it a thumbs up if you have, and I will see you in the next episode of City Skylines Europe. See you later.